Hello, my name is Eric Putkonen. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm talking about the fallacy of ego death. A lot of people have this idea that we must kill or destroy the ego. And it's a misunderstanding. The ego never really existed in the first place. And that which never really existed can't be killed. So, what's really happening? Well, it's kind of like if you're looking out, desert, highway pavement, whatever. But let's say you look out and there's a mirage, but you don't realize it's a mirage, and so you see water. The water never existed, and so there's no way to destroy the water because the water was never there. All that really happens is the false is seen as false. So the mirage is seen through, so to speak. The illusion of water is shattered. And what is recognized is refracted light off of hot air. And so it's not like the perception of a water, the illusion of water doesn't disappear. But it can no longer be believed. The holding power of the illusion is gone. But the actual perception of water is still there. And there's no reason to try to, run out with sticks and try to beat away the illusion. It's not like we need to get rid of the illusion. Now, people might be wondering, well, how does this relate to what, ego, as you were saying? The ego is like a mirage. There's just the I thought. The idea of me is merely an idea, an imagined idea. The ego it's kind of like the mind. I mean, there's really no such thing as mind. Mind is just the label we give to the stream of thought. There's thinking. There's thought. And where does this come from? We say it's the mind, or we say it is the mind. But it's just the stream of thought, and we term that as mind. And so when there's no stream of thought, it's called no mind. Or other teachers will say, and when there is no thought, where is the mind, or something to that effect. But basically, mind itself does not exist. It's just a label for a stream of thought, and when the stream of thought ceases, there's no mind. It never really existed. So you don't need to destroy the mind. Likewise, the ego is simply a label for our stream or continued misidentification. We're simply identifying as the body, as the mind, as the doer, as the seer, and there's all this self-referential thought within the stream of thought. And this constitutes the idea of me. In the absence of this stream of thought, there is no me. For the idea of me only exists in thought, so there has to be a thought of me for there to be a me. And so it's this stream of misidentification, this stream of self-referential thought, which we then even assign or attach it to feelings of inner contraction or tension and everything else. But this idea of me has been built, in many ways. But it's an illusion. It never really existed. And so after enlightenment, the illusion of me shatters. It's no longer believed. It, just like water cannot be believed anymore when a mirage is seen. The holding power of the illusion shatters. That is not to say all thoughts of me cease immediately and ever in an absolute way after enlightenment. Because the mind, again, the stream of thoughts, which is repetitive, conditioned thought by and large, is slow to turn. And so right after enlightenment, there will still be thoughts of a me and self-referential thoughts. But they simply cannot be believed. Just like if someone was chattering away at you constantly trying to convince you that you're your kitchen refrigerator, that's really what you should be identifying with, because that's really you. There's no way they could convince you that, because you know you're not your kitchen refrigerator. It's ridiculous to think so. Likewise, the habitual conditioned chattering thoughts may arise of a me, but it seems ridiculous. It can't be believed. Because it's been clearly seen that that me is a figment of imagination. There really is no me. But there is still the memory of association and identification. So another way to look at it is the me recedes from being a master to becoming a servant in a way. The idea of me no longer is in control. Instead, it is regulated to things like answering when a name is called. If someone calls out, "Hey Eric," I'm going to turn and look, because there's a recognition of it's referring to me. And this me is in reference to the body-mind. This body-mind is referred to as Eric. So when Eric is called, that recognition answers. And that is a subtle form of ego, but it is a useful form of ego. In that way, it is serving the purpose of the game. For this character to interact and operate in the world. But after enlightenment, and there's this continual not believing the reference to me that the conditioned habitual thoughts throw up, the mind does catch on. The brain catches on that these thoughts don't need to arise, because they're simply not believed anyway. And so the thoughts do diminish. Now, I will say there was a very noticeable diminishment in thought after enlightenment, but it's not like all thought disappears. And the remaining thought, some of it was habitual conditioned thought, and over the years, even that's been decreasing as the brain catches on that these thoughts aren't really believed. And so by and large, I would say normally there is a stillness of mind and absence of thought. I mean, even now, none of this is planned out. The talking is just arising without deliberation and thought behind it. It is just arising on its own. I'm not planning on what I'm saying. It's just coming up. And so life is far more spontaneous, without deliberation. It just arises. Arises from understanding, from being, however you want to put it. But there is still a recognition of the body-mind and what it can do within the world game, the game of life. And so if someone calls, "Hey Eric," I'll answer. And it is still possible to use conventions of speech and use the word I and me and even my and mine, because that's the normal way of speaking. But what is understood to be I and me is simply when I say, "I'm going to the store," I'm not referring to a sense of self, a believed me. That's not what's being said here. When I say I'm going to the store, I'm simply saying this body, mind, brain, this character is going to the store. If I say I'm going to work, what I mean is this body, mind, character is going to work. There's no sense of me or self in that. There's no illusion of me believed, in the sense that I don't believe that I as the self, am going to work. It's like, no, I, this body-mind, is going to work. And when I say my and mine, it's only within the legal constraints of this world game. My car. It's the car that this body-mind owns under the law of U.S., normal ownership rules. But it's not really believed. There's not a believed, hey, that's my car. That's not really believed. The idea of possession isn't particularly believed, but it's still played out and understood in the world game. Kind of like if you're playing Monopoly and you own Park Place and Boardwalk. You know you don't always own Park Place and Boardwalk. Every round of the game, different characters or players of the game may own it, and it transitions between players. In fact, no one really owns Park Place and Boardwalk and Monopoly. It's just part of the game. And under the rules of the game, someone could temporarily be said to be an owner. And so the idea of my and mine is different after enlightenment. But to say, that's my car, or I'm going to work, or whatever, doesn't mean an I is really believed. That's just using conventions of speech. But I would say now that it's been over 15 years since awakening, enlightenment, liberation, pick your label, happened, there really isn't, you would call a strong sense of self. There isn't what you would call a strong sense of this is me. That really isn't there. Is the ego still there? Well, of course, because the ego is part of the body, mind, brain complex. The ego is just simply not believed to be me. The ego is not the doer and controller anymore. It is simply the character, one of many characters in the game, and the entirety of the game is not other than the true self. Brahman, ultimate reality, groundless being, pick your label. It doesn't really matter. But there really is no sense of self because there's no other. The fundamental idea of me needs other. A me needs boundaries. A me needs a center. There is no sense of center, of boundaries, of other. And so there's really no sense of self. There's no sense of me. And so when somebody goes, well, what we want is ego death. We want to destroy the ego. I find this to be a fundamental misunderstanding. It's not that the ego needs to be destroyed. There's still an ego with this body-mind. There's still an idea of me. Again, if someone calls out, hey, Eric, there's an answer. That can only happen if there's some recognition of you're referring to me, this center area, this body-mind. And that's what the ego is regulated to, is simply another aspect of the body-mind, which, you are not. I mean, when you're looking at neti and things like that, the whole idea is overcoming the misidentification with the body and the mind. Well, the ego is just another aspect of that. And we identify as that, but we're not that. Not that we need to destroy it. It's useful to answer to the name that's called when you're being hailed. But what's really being talked about here is truly identifying with any of this, to dispel misidentification. Because when the sense of center, boundaries, other are dispelled, there's really no me left. And it's not the ego. The ego and sense of me is we pair them together. But they're not really the same. The sense of me in terms of me being the center, me being a being different than others or with a boundary or a center, doesn't arise. But there's still a shadow of an ego, you could say, that still realizes this body mind is named Eric, and if someone calls out, it's polite to answer. And so it's not like the ego is totally destroyed, totally killed, totally shattered. That's not the point. The point is to simply see through the ego and recognize what it isn't. And what it isn't is it's not me. The ego is simply another thought. It's a succession of thoughts and self-referential thought and misidentification with tensions or contractions in the body. This ego is a made-up thing. But this made-up thing has some value in the game. Again, answering to the name that's called. And so that's the fallacy of destroying the ego. If you have any questions, comments, please post below. But until next time, thank you much.